What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? Maybe a noise in the middle of the night? Or a shadow that seemed to move when you swore no one was there? What if I told you there are stories out there far scarier than anything you've ever imagined? Today we're diving into 3 of the most bone-chilling stories ever told. These tales have haunted listeners for generations, and if you dare to listen, you might find yourself looking over your shoulder tonight. Let's begin. Jack sat slouched in the chair across from me, his shoulders hunched, eyes constantly flicking toward the camera mounted in the corner. His fingers, pale and trembling, kept tugging at the frayed cuffs of his prison jumpsuit. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, worn down by something much deeper than exhaustion. It was fear, and something else. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm and controlled. "You said it started with a crack." Jack nodded slowly, barely meeting my gaze. "Yeah," he mumbled, "just a crack in the wall. That's how it all began." He paused, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything else. Then he took a shaky breath, his eyes distant, like he was trying to relive those first few days in his mind. "Solitary's always been a mess," he continued, voice hoarse. "The walls in there, cracked, dirty. You get used to it. It's like the whole place is rotting from the inside out. You stop noticing after a while. Mold in the corners, cracks everywhere. Normal stuff for a place like that." His fingers drummed absently on the table, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet room. I noticed the crack in my cell a few days before everything started. It was small, maybe 3 or 4 inches, right down by the corner where the wall meets the floor. Nothing unusual, right? These walls were falling apart all over the place, so I didn't pay much attention at first. He looked up, his brow furrowed as if trying to decide how to explain what happened next. But the next day, it wasn't just a crack anymore. There was something growing out of it. Black stuff. I thought it was mold. That's what you'd think, right? This place isn't exactly sanitary. Jack took a deep breath, his fingers tapping faster now, more erratic. It didn't move, at least not that I could see. But every time I looked at it, it seemed like there was more of it. I swear to God it was spreading, slow, maybe 6 inches a day. I couldn't see it move, but when I'd wake up in the morning, it had crept further along the wall, like it was crawling while I was sleeping. I wrote down the details and looked back up. "You're saying it was growing that fast, just overnight?" Jack nodded, his voice growing more agitated. "Yeah, I'd wake up and there'd be more of it. Not much at first, just a few more inches, but I could tell it was moving. The crack was getting wider too, and it wasn't just mold. I knew it wasn't mold, not with the way it looked. It wasn't just sitting there on the surface, it was alive." His voice grew quieter, as though he wasn't sure if he should be saying the words out loud. It was like it was breathing. I raised my eyebrow but kept my expression neutral. "What made you think that?" Jack shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the walls of the room before fixing on the table. It wasn't just that it was spreading, it was how it made the room feel. Different, like the air was heavier. It smelled wrong too, not like the usual mold or dampness. This was something else. It smelled like something rotting, foul, the kind of smell that makes you gag. He paused, rubbing his fingers against his temples, trying to recall every detail. "I told the guards the second day, right when I noticed it had spread. The guy dropping off food just shrugged it off, said he'd file a report, but I knew he wouldn't." "Why would he?" "It's solitary. They don't care what happens in there as long as we stay quiet." Jack's fingers clenched into fists, knuckles turning white. "So I waited. Figured maybe someone would check it out. But no one came. And each morning, when I woke up, the black stuff had spread a little more, not fast enough to notice while it was happening, but enough that I knew it was growing." His voice lowered, his eyes widening slightly as he recounted those days. By the 3rd day, it had covered the entire corner of the wall. The crack had gotten bigger, and the black stuff, it wasn't just growing anymore, it was feeding. It had to be. There was no other explanation for how it was spreading so steadily. Every morning it was a few inches closer, and the smell kept getting worse. He ran his hands through his hair again, his face etched with frustration and fear. I kept telling the guards. Every time they walked by, I'd bang on the door and shout that something was wrong. They thought I was losing it and told me to shut up and deal with it. But I wasn't crazy. That stuff was real and it was spreading. Jack took a deep breath, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. I wasn't imagining it. I know what I saw. The room felt heavier, his words sinking in like stones. He paused, waiting for my response, but I let the silence stretch, giving him time to collect himself. Finally, I asked, what happened after the third day? Did it stop? Jack shook his head, his voice wavering. No, it didn't stop. It just kept growing, slow but steady. Jack took another shaky breath, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. He looked around the room again, like he was searching for something that wasn't there, then rubbed his face with both hands. I could tell he was trying to push back the memories, but they kept clawing their way to the surface. It kept spreading, he muttered, his voice strained. Every morning I'd wake up, and that black stuff was a little closer. 6 inches, maybe more, every damn day. The crack too. It was getting bigger, like something was trying to push its way out from behind the wall. He stopped, staring at the ceiling for a moment, then shook his head. I couldn't take it anymore. I started banging on the door, yelling at the guards every time they passed. I told them the black stuff was spreading and that the crack was getting worse. They didn't believe me. They just looked at me like I was crazy. His hands clenched into fists. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. But to them, I was just another inmate trying to get out of solitary. They told me to calm down and that someone would come check it out, but no one ever did. Not for days. Jack's voice dropped lower. By the 4th day, I could barely breathe in there. The smell, it was like something had died in the walls. Worse than that, it was foul, like the whole room was rotting from the inside out. He stared down at his hands, and I could feel it. In my bones, you know, like something was wrong with the air itself. It felt thick and heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I couldn't sleep anymore. I'd lie awake at night, staring at that black stuff creeping along the wall, knowing it was getting closer. Jack paused, shaking his head again like he was trying to clear the memory. I begged them. Every time a guard walked by, I begged them to move me, to get me out of that cell. They ignored me. Days passed. The black stuff kept growing. I could feel it getting closer, but they didn't care. He let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. It wasn't until the lawsuit threats started flying that they decided to move me. They couldn't risk me going to a lawyer, saying they were keeping me in a contaminated cell. So, they moved me. I watched him carefully. Where did they take you? To another cell in solitary, Jack muttered. A dirtier one, if you can believe that. No black stuff, though. But I could still see my old cell from the window in my door, just a few doors down. I'd look at it every day, but I couldn't see the fungus. Not yet. His voice dropped, barely a whisper now. I wasn't the only one in solitary anymore. They put someone else in my old cell. Jack stared at the table, his face tight with anxiety. At first, I didn't hear much about him. The guards didn't talk to me after I was moved, but after a few days, I started to overhear things, little bits and pieces. They said the guy they put in my old cell, he'd touched the black stuff. They had to move him to the med wing. He stopped, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them. I didn't know what had happened to him at first, just that he was unconscious, and they didn't think he'd wake up. Then the rumors started. Jack's eyes darkened, his voice lowering. They said his skin was changing. One of the guards said it looked like it was blistering, like something was eating him from the inside out. Another said his veins were turning black, like the stuff was crawling under his skin. I scribbled down notes, glancing up at Jack. How long after they moved you did this happen? He shrugged, his voice distant. A couple of days, maybe. Not long. Whatever was in that cell, it got him fast. Jack's hand shook slightly as he continued. I started hearing more after that. The guards didn't want to talk about it, but I could tell they were scared. They were trying to keep it quiet, but everyone knew something was wrong. The guy they put in my old cell, He wasn't just sick, he was changing. Jack shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if the memory of what came next still gnawed at him. It wasn't long after that when things started changing. I could feel it. Something was happening in that place. The guards. They stopped talking, just did their rounds without saying a word. No more gossip, no more jokes, nothing. He paused, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. The guy in the med wing, they said he wasn't getting better. They'd quarantined him and locked the whole wing down. That's when they started wearing those suits. You know, the ones they wear when there's a biohazard. Full suits, gloves, masks. I couldn't even see their faces anymore. Jack's voice grew more agitated. When they came to drop off my meals, they wouldn't look at me. Just shoved the tray through the slot and walked away. I tried asking them what was going on, but they didn't answer. They didn't say a damn thing. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I watched him carefully, jotting down notes as he spoke. Did you see anything unusual from your cell during this time? Jack nodded slowly, his eyes flicking up toward the small window in the door. Yeah. I started watching my old cell more closely. I couldn't see the black stuff at first, not from where I was, but after a few days, I saw it. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. The fungus. It was spreading, creeping along the walls of my old cell. I could see it through the window. It had covered almost the whole corner by then, and the crack. It was bigger, a lot bigger. I couldn't see it move, but every day it was a little further along, a little darker, like it was eating away at the walls. Jack swallowed hard, rubbing his hands together again, and the smell, even from where I was, I could smell it, like rot, like something festering. It made my stomach turn every time I caught a whiff of it. He shook his head slowly, his voice growing more desperate. I kept banging on the door, shouting at the guards, asking what the hell was going on. They wouldn't tell me anything, just dropped off the meals and left. No one spoke to me anymore. It was like the whole place had gone silent. Jack's eyes met mine, wide with fear. That's when I knew. Whatever was happening in that prison, it wasn't just some sickness. It was something else, something worse. Jack's voice wavered as he continued, the fear evident in every word. A couple more days passed, and that's when the real shit hit the fan. They stopped delivering meals on time. One day, nothing. No food, no guards, just silence, and I knew something had happened. I could feel it in the air. He rubbed his arms as if trying to shake off a chill. I kept looking out my window, trying to see anything, but the hall was empty. No one came by, no sounds, nothing. It was like I'd been forgotten. Jack paused, his voice trembling slightly, and then I heard the screaming. His eyes grew wide as he relived the moment. It wasn't loud. Solitary's far enough from the main wings that you don't hear much, but I heard it. Faint, like it was coming from down the hall near the med wing. Someone was shouting, panicked like they were fighting something. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. Jack's breath hitched, and he gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. That's when I saw them. The guards. They were running. I've never seen them run before, not like that. They were trying to get out of the med wing, but something was wrong. One of them looked terrified, and I could hear them shouting at each other, then silence. He stared at the table, eyes wide and unblinking. That's when I heard the footsteps. Jack's breath quickened as he continued. They were heavy, dragging, like something was limping down the hall. I rushed to the window, trying to see what it was, but the hall was still empty. The sound grew louder and closer, and I swear, it was coming from the direction of the med wing. Whatever was making those footsteps, it wasn't walking like a person. He paused, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I heard the guards again. They were shouting something about getting the doors open. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew they were scared, and that scared me. Jack looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. I saw one of them, a guard running down the hall. He was heading toward my cell, fumbling with the keys, trying to unlock the door. He kept looking back like something was chasing him. He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. I didn't see it at first, but I heard it. This wet, squelching sound, like something dragging across the floor, And then I saw it. The thing they'd put in the med wing. It wasn't human anymore. It was changed. Jack's hands shook as he spoke, and I could see the fear in his eyes, the memory of that moment burning like a fresh wound. I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at it. The thing, it wasn't human anymore. I don't even know if it remembered being human. His voice cracked, his breath uneven. It was big, taller than I remembered the prisoner being, like it had been stretched somehow. Its skin, if you could even call it that anymore, was swollen, bulging in places like it was filled with something. The black fungus had grown over most of its body, but it wasn't just on the surface. You could see it moving underneath, crawling through its veins, thick and dark. Its skin was splitting in places, oozing this thick black liquid. Parts of it looked like they were rotting, but it was still alive. Jack leaned forward, his voice dropping as he described the creature in horrifying detail. The worst part was its face. The fungus had taken over most of it, but I could still see parts of what used to be a man. His mouth was hanging open, slack, like it had forgotten how to close. His eyes. God, his eyes. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the whole thing, like they'd been swallowed by the darkness inside him. Jack's hands gripped the table, his knuckles white. It wasn't just the way it looked. It moved wrong too, like its bones had been broken and put back together in the wrong order. Its arms were too long, its legs bent in ways that didn't make sense. It didn't walk so much as lurch, dragging one foot behind the other. Every step it took made this wet, squelching sound, like the fungus was eating away at it from the inside out. He paused, staring at the floor, his voice growing weaker. It smelled too, like rot, like meat left out too long. The air around it was thick with the stench, and I could barely breathe. I don't know how the guard could stand being that close. Jack swallowed hard, eyes wide. He almost had the door open. I was right there, watching through the window, and I could see him fumbling with the keys, trying to get the lock undone. His hands were shaking so bad I thought he'd dropped the keys. His voice trembled as he continued. He was muttering to himself, saying something about needing to get me out. I don't even think he saw the thing coming for him until it was too late. Jack squeezed his eyes shut as if trying to block out the memory. The door clicked open. He finally got it. I thought for a second I was going to make it, but that thing, it was right behind him. It grabbed him before he even had a chance to run. Jack's voice faltered, barely above a whisper. I've never seen anything like it. The way it grabbed him, like it didn't even care. It just tore into him. Its hands, if you can even call them that, were these twisted claws, black and dripping with whatever the fungus had turned it into. It sank them into his chest like they were cutting through butter. He shook his head, eyes distant. He didn't scream, not even once. 1 second he was there, and the next, he wasn't. Just blood, everywhere. The thing was ripping him apart, tearing chunks out of him like it was feeding, and I just stood there watching, too scared to move. Jack took a deep breath, his voice still shaking. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like forever. But after it was done, it didn't even look at me. It just turned and started dragging his body down the hall, like it didn't have any purpose, like it was just following some mindless instinct. His hands were still trembling. Jack lifted his head slightly, and his voice was growing faint. And then, it left. Jack's breathing was shaky as he continued, his hands still trembling slightly from the memory. I thought it was over. I thought once it killed the guard, I'd be next. But it didn't even look at me. It just dragged the body down the hall. His voice wavered, growing more desperate as he relived the moment. The fungus. It had spread. I hadn't noticed it before, not like that. I could see it now, seeping out from under the door of my old cell, black tendrils creeping into the hallway. It had gotten bigger, much bigger. Thick, dark strands covered the walls near the cell, growing into the cracks, spreading further and faster than I'd ever seen. Jack swallowed hard, his voice shaking. The thing, it dragged the guard's body right up to the spot where the fungus was leaking out into the hall. I thought maybe it was going to leave him there, but no, it did something worse. He looked down at the table as if ashamed of what he'd seen. It shoved the guard's body into the fungus. Just pushed him right into it like the wall wasn't even there anymore. The black stuff, those tendrils, they wrapped around him, pulling him deeper like it was absorbing him. Jack's voice grew quieter, his fear palpable. I could see it. The fungus spread over the guard's body, crawling over his skin and covering him like a web. His face, what was left of it, disappeared into the black mass, and then the wall seemed to eat him. It pulled him in until all I could see was this black mound stuck to the wall like it was holding him there. He stared at the floor, eyes wide. It was like the fungus had claimed him, like it was feeding off of him. The more it wrapped around him, the bigger it got, spreading faster now, reaching further along the hallway. Jack paused, his breath catching in his throat. And then the thing that killed him, it started eating. His voice faltered, his eyes wide with terror. It crouched down right by the spot where the fungus was growing the thickest, and then it started tearing chunks of it off, big, wet chunks of black mold, and shoving it into its mouth. It was like it was starving for it, like it needed the fungus to survive. Jack's body shook, his hands clenching into fists. I couldn't watch. It was eating the fungus like it was meat, like it was devouring something alive. And the more it ate, the more the fungus seemed to spread. I could see the walls pulsing, like they were alive, like the whole damn place was breathing. He looked up at me, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was still the prisoner or something else entirely, but whatever it wasn't human anymore. It was part of the fungus, part of whatever was growing inside the walls. Jack's breath hitched, his eyes wide. I was too scared to move. I just watched as it fed. Jack's voice was quieter now, but there was a tension in every word. I don't know how long I stood there, watching it eat. I was too scared to move, too scared to breathe. I thought if I made a sound, it would turn around and I'd be next. He swallowed hard, staring at the table as if seeing that moment again. But eventually, it stopped. The thing just stood up. Slow, like it had all the time in the world. I thought for sure it would notice me then, but it didn't. It just turned, shuffling down the hall back toward the med wing. The fungus was still spreading behind it, creeping further down the walls. Jack took a shaky breath, his hands clenching and unclenching as he continued. That was my chance. The door was unlocked. I didn't want to go out there, but I knew I couldn't stay in the cell. Not with that thing out there, not with the fungus spreading. He paused, his eyes wide, still rattled by the memory. So I opened the door. As quietly as I could, I slipped out into the hallway. The place smelled worse than ever, like the air itself was rotting. The walls, they were breathing, pulsing with the black fungus. It had spread further since the last time I looked, covering the doors, the cracks, creeping along the floor. His voice wavered, fear threading through his words. I didn't know where to go. The hall was empty. No guards, no prisoners. Just me. I thought about heading back to the main wings, but I didn't know if anyone else was still alive. I didn't know if the fungus had spread to the rest of the prison. Jack rubbed his temples, trying to push back the panic that still clung to his voice. The sound. I couldn't get it out of my head. The walls were making this wet, squelching noise. Every time the fungus pulsed, it sounded like something living was inside the walls, moving with it, like the prison itself was infected. He looked up at me, eyes wide with fear. I kept moving, but it was slow. I was terrified of making too much noise. I didn't know if that thing was still out there, and I wasn't going to take any chances. I stuck close to the walls, avoiding the patches of black mold that were creeping up from the cracks in the floor. The whole place felt wrong. It felt alive. His hands trembled as he spoke, the fear in his voice growing. I made my way through the hallway, past the other cells. Some of them were still locked. I could hear things inside, but I didn't stop to listen. I couldn't afford to. I just kept going, trying to get as far away from that thing as I could. Jack swallowed hard. I don't know how long I walked before I reached the door to the main wing. I thought maybe I'd find someone. Another guard. Maybe, but the door, it was locked, no way out. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting to the camera in the corner of the room. I was trapped. He rubbed his hands over his face, his voice trembling. That's when I heard it. The creature, the thing that killed the guard. It was coming back. I could hear its footsteps, that slow, wet shuffle, dragging something along the floor. I knew it was coming for me this time. His hands clenched the edge of the table. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I looked around, trying to find somewhere to hide, but there was nothing. The fungus was everywhere, crawling along the floor, the walls. I could hear it pulsing. I thought I could feel it inside my head, beating like a second heartbeat. Jack swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a whisper. And then I saw it. An air vent, just above the door. It was small, barely big enough for me to squeeze through, but it was my only option. I climbed up, using the edge of the door for leverage, and pulled the grate off the vent. It wasn't quiet, but the creature, it didn't seem to care. It just kept coming. He took a shaky breath. I shoved myself inside the vent, trying not to make too much noise. I could hear it below me, dragging itself closer. I could feel the heat from its body, the smell of rot filling the air. I didn't dare look down. I just kept crawling, inch by inch, through that narrow space, praying it wouldn't hear me. Jack rubbed his hands together, the tension clear in his body. I don't know how long I crawled through those vents. It felt like forever. I could hear the fungus growing inside the walls, like it was alive, spreading through the ducts. But eventually I found another opening. He looked up, his eyes wide. I didn't know where I was anymore. The prison was like a maze, but I knew I had to get out. I climbed out of the vent and dropped down into another hallway. This one was quieter and cleaner. I could hear voices in the distance. Someone was talking. It wasn't a guard. It sounded official. Jack's fingers trembled slightly. That's when I saw them. Federal agents. They were wearing protective suits, walking through the hallway and talking into radios. I tried to call out to them, but my voice was barely a whisper. I was weak, starving, and my body felt like it was shutting down. He rubbed his face, his voice quieter now. One of them saw me. They turned and pointed, and the others came running. They grabbed me, lifted me up, and I blacked out after that. When I woke up, I was here. The room was quiet for a moment as Jack finished his story. He stared down at his hands, pale and trembling, the words hanging in the air like a thick fog. I watched him carefully, my mind turning over the details of what he'd said. The transformed prisoner, the fungus, the guards. It all lined up with the reports, but something felt off. I glanced at my notes, then back at Jack. You said the fungus was in the walls, that it was everywhere. Do you think it spread beyond the prison? Jack hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly. I don't know. It was moving fast. If it's still there, it's probably spread even further by now. I tapped my pen against the table, considering my next question. What about you? Did you come into contact with the fungus? Jack's eyes flickered toward the camera in the corner of the room, his expression tightening. No, he said quickly. I stayed away from it. I made sure. I watched him closely, noting the tension in his voice. You're sure? No spores, no mold on your skin? Jack's hands clenched into fists, his voice dropping. I said I didn't touch it. But something was wrong. I could see it now, in the way he moved, the way his skin looked under the harsh fluorescent light. There were small, barely noticeable black spots on his hands, like tiny cracks forming just beneath the surface. His fingernails were chipped and discolored, and there was a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. I leaned forward slightly. Jack, are you feeling all right? He didn't answer at first. He stared down at his hands, his breath growing shallow. His fingers twitched again, and then I saw it. Just the slightest movement. The skin on his knuckles shifted, bulging for a moment like something was crawling underneath. Jack's eyes widened, his breath quickening. No, this isn't happening. I didn't touch it. But the evidence was clear now. His skin was changing, dark veins spreading slowly under the surface. The fungus had gotten to him. I could see the horror in his eyes as the realization hit him. He backed away from the table, his voice trembling. You've got to help me. I can feel it, under my skin. It's spreading. I stood up, reaching for the door, but Jack grabbed my arm, his grip weak but desperate. "Please, don't let it take me. Don't let me turn into one of them." I pulled away, calling for the other agents. The door swung open and they rushed in, their eyes wide as they saw the black veins creeping up Jack's arms. He collapsed to the floor, shaking, his breath ragged. "It's too late," he whispered. "It's already inside me." And then, as the agents restrained him, I saw the first crack in his skin. The black tendrils were already spreading. After Jack was restrained and taken away, I sat there in silence, my mind racing. His story was almost too terrifying to believe, but the black veins spreading under his skin told me that something far worse than we could have imagined had happened in that prison. The medical team rushed Jack out of the room, and I made my way to the surveillance office. The tapes from the prison security cameras had been pulled, but I knew where I needed to start. The med bay. Jack had mentioned the prisoner who had been quarantined there, the one who had touched the fungus. If I was going to understand what we were dealing with, I needed to see what had happened to him. I sat down in front of the monitor and loaded the med bay footage. The timestamp matched the days Jack had been talking about, right around the time they had moved him to a new cell and put the infected prisoner in his old one. The screen flickered to life, showing the sterile, dimly lit interior of the med bay. At first, the footage seemed ordinary. The prisoner lay on the bed, motionless, connected to machines that were monitoring his vitals. 2 guards stood nearby, occasionally glancing at him but not paying much attention. It all looked normal, until the prisoner's body twitched. I leaned forward, watching closely. The prisoner shifted again, his arms jerking slightly, his head rolling to one side. At first, it looked like he was waking up, but something was wrong. His movements were erratic and unnatural. The guards noticed it too. They stepped closer to the bed, exchanging nervous glances. And then it began. The prisoner's body convulsed, his back arching off the bed as if something inside him was forcing its way out. His skin started to blister, bulging in grotesque patterns, as if something was crawling underneath. The guards rushed toward him, shouting for help, but it was too late. I watched in horror as the black veins spread beneath the prisoner's skin, creeping up from his hands, his arms, his neck, everywhere. His face twisted in pain, his mouth opening in a silent scream, but no sound came out. His eyes turned black, completely black, as if the darkness inside him had consumed everything. The guards panicked. One of them backed away while the other tried to restrain the prisoner, but the prisoner was no longer human. His body was contorted, his arms bending at impossible angles, his skin cracking open to reveal the black fungal growth underneath. It spread across his body like wildfire, taking over every inch of him. Then, with a terrifying burst of strength, the prisoner snapped free from his restraints and lunged at the guard closest to him. The camera shook as the scene descended into chaos. The other guard screamed, backing into the corner, as the prisoner, now a monstrous creature, ripped into his colleague, tearing him apart with inhuman strength. I paused the footage, my heart pounding. The image on the screen was frozen. The creature, mid-attack, its black eyes staring soullessly into the distance as it tore into the guard's chest. The room was a bloodbath, and the transformation was complete. Whatever that thing was, it was no longer the man they had brought into the med bay. I hit play again, watching as the creature dragged the lifeless guard's body across the room, tossing it aside like a rag doll. The other guard tried to escape, fumbling with the door, but the creature was faster. It leapt at him, bringing him down in an instant. Blood splattered across the camera lens, obscuring the footage for a moment, and then silence. The creature stood over the bodies, breathing heavily, its chest rising and falling in sharp, unnatural movements. Black fungus covered its skin, growing thicker and darker with each passing second. It lingered there, almost motionless, and then turned slowly toward the camera. I froze. Its black, hollow eyes were locked directly on the lens as if it knew I was watching. I shut off the footage, leaning back in my chair, my breath ragged. Whatever had happened in that prison, it had started here, in the med bay, and now it was spreading. I'm not sure how this is going to be perceived, but it is extremely vital that I get the word out to someone. So far, no one has listened to me. No cops, no DAs, no therapists, no psychiatrist, absolutely no one. I need someone to believe me. I am not losing my mind. I had a friend group consisting of 5 guys: Big Tom, Daryl, Robbie, Lawrence and Jill, with myself making up the 6th of the group. All of us had been friends since high school and hung out through college. It was known even in high school and more in college that even though all of us were a group, Lawrence and Jill were best friends first. If a party was on the agenda for the night, they always arrived together and left together. Both went to the same college, majored in computer science, and both graduated top of the class. Having 2 friends like that led to so many jokes about sexuality or dependence, but within the group, it was normal. Kind of like having twins as friends, I always thought. Hell, they even looked alike, both being small, nerdy types. Cut to us at 26, and we all lived in the same city, Chicago. Tom and I had a house all to ourselves out in the suburbs, which was where the incident took place. We had a once-a-month poker night that all of us showed up to religiously. Big Tom and I held the poker night in the basement, which was decorated like you would expect college graduates without prospective dating partners would decorate the house like. It was an open-concept basement, with just one length of a wall being taken up by the bathroom and the laundry room. We had posters along the walls along with Tom's trophies. He had many, and they were large. Seeing as he used to be a top wrestling prospect at university until he messed up his shoulder. Tom had always been big, but after the shoulder injury he had ballooned up to 350 pounds, giving the nickname Big Tom some serious truth behind it. Daryl and Robbie showed up around 9 that night. Poker night didn't start until 10, but Robbie never turned down a beer, and Daryl liked having a buddy to ride with on the metro. We were casually waiting around the table when Robbie started talking about Lawrence and Jill. What do you think they got up to in Thailand? Just some fun times or something better? Like he said as he killed his beer with a wink. Come on, man. Don't be like that. They went to look at some temples or something. Don't be rude about it, Tom said, giving Robbie his patented look of disdain. I'm just saying, man, those 2 have been getting weirder and weirder. I caught lunch with them in the city before the trip, and they were super excited, like kids on Christmas morning excited. And 2 days ago, I saw them on Lower Wacker at night, just walking among the slums. No smiles, no expressions. I honked my horn and flipped the bird out the window, and they just stared like I was a stranger. Now tell me that ain't some weird shit, Robbie said. It was a bit strange because even though Lawrence and Jill were tight, they were always friendly and quick to say hello. And it wouldn't be like they missed seeing Robbie. He was the only asshat in Chicago to drive a bright blue jacked-up Jeep. It stood out, making it easy to spot him randomly out and about the city. Yeah, well, who knows, man? Maybe you pissed them off recently. Did you do anything extremely dick-headed to them lately? I asked, knowing just how easy it was to be pissed at Robbie. He had a way of getting under your skin, but was good about recognizing when he goes too far. That's just it. I haven't done anything. I've practically been a choir boy, Robbie said excitedly, sensing I was grasping his meaning with our 2 friends. We then heard the garage door open, something that was not shocking as we had given each of our friends the passcode, allowing them to come in whenever they wanted. Well, I think they just arrived, so drop it. We'll see how the night goes, and if it's still weird at the end of it, we'll say something as a group. Fair? Daryl proposed, quickly agreed upon by Tom and myself. Just then, we heard the door to the basement open, and down came Lawrence and Jill, both looking stone-faced and stiff with their movements. Boys, about time, let's do this, Big Tom shouted as we made our way around the poker table. Lawrence and Jill looked at each other, and then sat down across from each other. The other 4 of us just stared in amazement. They never sat apart from one another. They had always sat next to each other, Jill on the right and Lawrence on the left. Robbie gave me a wide-eyed face and motioned with his eyes at the pair in a "are you seeing this shit" kind of way. I sat down with the others, not exactly ignoring Robbie, but not giving in to his skepticism just yet. Daryl grabbed the cards and started shuffling as Tom pulled out the chips from under the table and started dividing them up between us. We played as normal, but there were problems with Jill and Lawrence, like the way they were placing bets, or the fact that they never once cracked a smile or a joke during the time we played. They would never increase a bet, but always called one, regardless of if they had a good hand or not. They didn't drink anything either. No beer, no water, no sodas, nothing. It wasn't making any sense. And then there were their eyes. I would catch them staring, leering at us as the night wore on. Jill was staring at me and Tom, while Lawrence's eyes lingered on Daryl and Robbie. Robbie finally stood and said he was going for a smoke, gesturing upstairs and looking at me. "Yeah, I'll burn one," I said, heading towards the stairs with him. "I'm going to use the toilet," Lawrence said suddenly, standing up and looking at Jill with such an intense stare. "I'll stay here," Jill said, peering down at Lawrence intently. "Are you two hooking up or something? Jesus, you two are so weird tonight," Robbie said as we went upstairs. I didn't even have it in me to tell him off for making fun of them, because I was getting a bit weirded out by them as well. Outside the garage, Robbie had already lit a cigarette and passed me the butt. He took a deep drag and sighed. "Dude, we have to say something. This is beyond weird, man." "Yeah, I know. I keep getting the feeling that they are staring at us, like they are watching our moves or something," I said, exhaling smoke and looking at the stars. I was trying to keep my cool and not let Robbie make me even more nervous. "Dude, exactly. Lawrence is looking at me like I'm a steak man. Did you see how his eyes are dark, like the eye itself and the skin around it? It's giving me the creeps. I don't like this. I know Daryl and Tom are going to try and keep it civil and chill, but we have to find out what's going on. That means getting a bit tough with them and getting them to tell us the truth about what has changed them so much," Robbie said, almost pleading with me. He flicked his butt into my yard, drawing a stern gaze from me. But he was right. This was beyond normal for Lawrence and Jill, and we needed to say something to get them back to normal. "Okay, you're right. Let's go down and..." Bam! We looked at each other. It sounded like a truck had crashed in my house. Bam! Bam! 2 more crashes. I could then tell it was from my basement. "What the hell?" Robbie said, pushing past me, and as he ran towards the door, I was right on his heels. He led the way through the house to the basement stairs, taking them in leaps. We landed at the bottom of the stairs and came upon the scene of a horror movie. Jill was atop Tom's back, with both of them turned away from us. It looked like Jill was trying to choke out Tom, which was a ridiculous assumption considering Tom was twice his size and had years of training on his side. The basement was littered with the broken table and chairs, trophies strewn among the floor with the walls smashed in. Slowly, the two turned around and we could see the true savagery that was taking place. Jill had a knife and was plunging it into Tom's chest and neck. Blood was flowing down Tom's shirt, almost pouring down the floor. Tom had a glazed look in his eyes and was making hand gestures towards us, like grabbing towards us or motioning us to go away. Tom's legs gave out with him dropping to his knees. It was then that I looked at Jill. Jill was grinning from ear to ear, breathing heavily but still able to laugh in a wheezing manner. It was as if he was getting joy out of murdering one of his closest friends. It was a sound that would have been unsettling even without the look on his face and the knife he was plunging into his friend's body. I then saw his eyes, pure black, with black veins surrounding them. His gaze was focused clearly on Tom's, and I could hear him say words to Tom. "Una magis anima pro domino, una magis anima pro domino, una magis..." Jill kept repeating the words until Tom fell face first onto the floor. Robbie and I hadn't moved. We were frozen in terror as we saw a friend murder another friend. I couldn't make my legs move, nor could I seem to take a breath. I broke through the fear when I heard Robbie cry, "What's happening?" "Tom!" I screamed as I ran towards Tom's body, as adrenaline pumped through me now. Jill looked up from Tom's back, still smiling, tilting his head to one side. "One more for the master," he whispered before launching himself at me from the floor. I saw the knife in his hand but could do nothing to stop it, as he quickly closed the space between us and plunged the knife into the side of my knee. I screamed in pain and collapsed on the ruined leg. When I collapsed, I fell on the knife, trapping it between my body and the floor. Jill was tugging at the handle, causing pain to keep shooting up my leg with each pull, causing my scream to falter and crack as my body started to sputter. My heart was beating out of my chest and I was losing my ability to breathe. Pain was controlling me, but fear was heightening the pain to the max. I had never seen my own blood come out like that, in such a spurting manner. "Oh my God, oh my God!" I screamed, hyperventilating as I looked at Jill and his smile. "I don't want to die. I began to repeat in my head over and over. The pain and fear caused the thought to go faster in my mind as I watched Jill wrench at the knife. I was looking around wildly as Jill finally gave up on the knife and grabbed something off the floor. Robbie jumped over me then and tackled Jill to the floor. Robbie burst up and immediately started kicking Jill. I tried to crawl away from the carnage, scared for my life, yet still watching over my shoulder as Robbie attacked Jill. Robbie looked to be getting the upper hand when the door to the bathroom burst open. I turned forward and saw Lawrence standing there. With a knife in his hand, blood dripped from the blade onto the floor. I looked at his face and saw the same black eyes and black starburst veins leading from his eyes into his cheeks and forehead. He began to make his way towards Robbie and Jill. He walked past me, his target being Robbie alone. I fought through the fear and made my move. I rolled over and grabbed a hold of Lawrence's leg, yelling to Robbie, "Robbie, run now!" Lawrence slashed down with his knife and I reached up with my left arm to protect my face. Lawrence slashed my arm and I felt another flare of pain. Lawrence reared back to slash again, and I found a reserve of energy and pushed up with all my might to tip Lawrence backwards and off balance. He went down hard, falling on the arm without the knife. There was a loud crack as Lawrence landed. The knife he had previously been holding flew across the floor into the debris caused by the fight between Tom and Jill. I thought he would be done for, so I didn't expect Lawrence's foot to connect with my chin. I had a sense of shock, and then the lights went out. I came to, slowly rising up, seeing Lawrence and Jill towering over a now beaten down Robbie. It looked like Robbie had given them all he had, but the two close friends seemed to feel no pain. Lawrence's left hand was dripping blood, and I noticed the bone was sticking out of the forearm. That was his only injury as I looked over at Jill and saw that Robbie had tuned him up good. One eye was almost completely swollen shut, and blood was dripping down off his chin at a steady rate from multiple facial wounds. But regardless of their wounds, both men were standing still and stared down at the prone, yet still alive Robbie. They began to chant, the same line that Jill had said before taking down Tom. "Una magis anima pro domino, una magis anima pro domino, una magis anima pro domino," they were shouting. I saw that both now held some of Tom's large wrestling trophies in hand. I could sense the moment coming to a head, and knew that Robbie would be on the receiving end of that moment. Robbie then came to life, and he kicked up with his leg at Jill, trying to knock him down. But Robbie had been beaten too badly, and his strength was too far gone. Lawrence and Jill then both looked at each other and smiled. They raised their makeshift weapons, and I turned my head before I could see another friend perish under their blows. I covered my ears and waited for the screaming to stop, followed by the thuds. When I opened my eyes and uncovered my ears, my two former friends were now standing above me. Both sets of eyes were blacker than before, the veins of black spreading further into their faces. Whatever they were doing, it seemed to be consuming their very faces. "Our master requires payment," Jill said, tilting his head from side to side. He was studying me, I realized, like a scientist would when they study a worm in the ground. I could feel hatred and evilness emit from his face. There was also an alien feeling, like something from out of this world was trying to break free from the blackness that was his eyes. "We are close to glory. You are close to glory. You shall witness his rise, even after you fall," Lawrence whispered. "We are close now. 3 more payments, and the master shall grace us." I waited as they began their chant again, knowing I would only have a few seconds to do what I needed to do. I had to time it right. There would only be one chance. Fear had me in its grip, but I had to overcome it. They looked down as they spoke, smiles so large that it cracked their faces in half. "Una magis anima pro domino, una magis anima pro domino," they chanted, raising the trophies in the air again. Their eyes, black pits now, with no distinction between the skin and eye. Their faces were sucking in all light in the world, drinking in my fear and my soul itself. "Stop! Just stop!" I yelled, as I reached both hands up to fend off the coming blows. I knew this was the end, but my body was still fighting on. I grabbed Jill's weapon as it came down. I had hope for just a second, until I heard Lawrence's grunt behind me. I don't remember what happened after that, because Lawrence brought his trophy down on my head. 1, 2, 3 times he struck, and again I lost consciousness. A cop explained the next moments to me when I was fully conscious again and could answer questions. That was a week after the incident, seeing as I was in a coma for a while. A neighbor had heard the commotion. Since Robbie and I had failed to shut the garage door or the door leading to the basement, the screams scared the neighbor so much they had called the police. Right when Lawrence brought the trophy down on my head for the third time, the cops burst downstairs with tasers and guns drawn and took down both Lawrence and Jill. Lawrence was on the receiving end of the guns, and they had done too much damage for the paramedics to save him. Lawrence's final moments consisted of him laughing and chanting, that same line being repeated over and over, "Una magis anima pro domino." Jill, though, lived, as he was the lucky one to catch the prongs from the tasers. He was taken to jail immediately after being fixed up at the hospital, although I heard he was telling a different version of what I had of the night. The police found Daryl in the bathroom, in the tub to be exact. They believe that Lawrence had lured him in somehow before doing the deed. I think that Lawrence and Jill had chosen between us who would be whose victim, which is why they attacked us at different intervals. I found out later in the hospital and from the subsequent criminal investigation what had happened to cause them to become murderous beings. Lawrence and Jill had made it to Thailand, but witnesses had seen them get into a car with 3 Englishmen, dressed all fancy apparently, the first night in Bangkok. The next time any CCTV or witnesses caught any sight of the friends were when they were dropped off at the airport by the same car. They left all their luggage at the hotel along with all their money. They had 13 days of unaccounted for time. The authorities believe that this is all unrelated. I have pleaded with them to take it seriously and to investigate it, but they ignore me. I have tried telling my doctors or anyone who comes to see me that there is something more to this situation than men going crazy. The cops had searched their apartments, finding that Jill had actually been staying at Lawrence's place since their return. The walls were covered in Latin, with phrases mentioning a master and the payments that were required. It was discovered the chant that Gill and Lawrence were saying, "Una magis anima pro domino," was in fact one more soul for the master. The police also found out that the two had taken to walking the streets of Chicago at night, but haven't investigated that matter any further. The cops and detectives all believe that Jill and Lawrence were lovers, whose strain of hiding their relationship caused Lawrence to snap and force Jill into the crimes, that murdering us friends was the only way to keep their relationship a secret. The police refused to investigate any unsolved murders and tell me that Lawrence had just gone crazy, and while Jill was complicit in the crimes, he was a victim just as well. Jill had apparently admitted all this, crying and breaking down how he did not want to hurt anyone. It was all Lawrence. Jill claimed that he was actually trying to protect me after Lawrence had attacked the others. He was trying to hit Lawrence with a trophy, not me. Jill claims that Lawrence had committed all the murders and that he was the master. The police seem to believe him, because I heard that he is only being charged with battery and kidnapping. It's all a lie, or the authorities are just grasping at straws. They were not lovers, nor did they go crazy. Jill was just as guilty as Lawrence for those atrocities. There was something different about them that night. Jill's eyes are apparently normal now, because the police believed I was hallucinating and misremembering facts due to the head trauma. When I explained the blackness and the spreading evil in the veins, they said that Jill said I would be saying that I had been screaming about blackness and eyes while Lawrence attacked me. I sit here in the hospital, assured by the police that Jill is in jail and is not intent on harming me. That is a lie. I have been here at the hospital for 14 days, dealing with brain swelling and some terrible damage to my knee. While I was told I'd never walk without a limp and had a chance of continued symptoms from the brain damage, it was not injuries that caused me to begin to worry. I have begun to notice things. Certain hospital staff members have a darkness about their eyes. I feel myself staring at the orderlies, who watch me too much as they enter the room, and listening to the door after the RNs leave the room, whispering to themselves. Doctors say this is the brain swelling causing me to hallucinate. The police believe that my injuries are to blame for my beliefs as well. I swear I can hear "Una magis anima pro domino," or "one more for the master," if I listen closely at night. My family thinks the blows to my head have caused me to become unhinged, seeing danger at every turn, but I know the staff are listening to me and staring at me, but they make no move against me. Jill is in jail, but I don't think he will stay there. The news has kept the whole situation on the down low. Nothing has been mentioned on any of the major networks or newspapers, nor have any of the tabloids mentioned the incident. I think I can make it out the window and onto the ground without anyone seeing me, if I have to make a move. I still have one good leg, and could make it to at least somewhere with a car and get out of town. The police are in on the lie as well. At least the ones I have been talking to are. They say I am not allowed to leave the hospital at all, for my own safety. It's all a lie, that I know. I can make a run, but I don't know how long. I may have a brain injury, I know that, but I'm not crazy. I know what I saw and what actually happened that night. I know the truth. I have to go now. I hear a commotion down the hall. It sounds like someone singing, or maybe chanting. Una magis anima pro domino. That is all I hear now. One more for the master. I currently work as a train station master, or rather assistant station master, even though I tend to do all the duties of both. ASM, as my name tag so helpfully proclaims to anyone with exceptional eyesight. However, working out the acronym in itself might take some time. Although a small station in North Wales, it's one that sees plenty of foot traffic due to the nearby mountains, especially Snowdon, the highest peak in Wales. On a typical day, you'd find me behind the booking desk, issuing tickets to the constant flow of tourists and hikers, or helpfully describing the best way to reach the summit of our beautiful mountain. It's a monotonous job, but it pays the bills, and I've grown fond of the routine over the years. I'd been eyeing the station master position for some time, eagerly waiting on the day old Gwyn would finally retire, but the old man has still got a spring to his step for a 70-year-old, so I think it'll still be some years yet. The day my life changed forever was supposed to be my day off. My wife Ruby and I had planned a trip to Anglesey to visit the South Stack Lighthouse, as I'd always had a love for these beacons of safety or danger on how you approach it. The evening before our trip, I was relaxing on the couch watching the telly, whilst Ruby was busying herself in the bedroom. "Hey babe, you all packed for tomorrow?" I shouted to her. Her voice drifted back from the other room, tinged with amusement. "Unlike you, Mr. Last Minute, I packed yesterday. We're only going for one night, remember? Not embarking on a 6-month cruise." "I only wish," I chuckled, as she came back in and plopped down beside me on the sofa. "Promises, promises," she said, rolling her eyes. "Just as soon as you get that promotion, right?" I turned to her, a mischievous glint in my eye. "Well, I can definitely promise you'll beg me to stop in less than a minute," before pouncing to tickle her mercilessly. "Stop!" she squealed, curling into a ball and swatting at me playfully. Our moment was interrupted by my phone ringing. I glanced at it over my shoulder, hesitating. "Leave it," Ruby urged, trying to pull me back, knowing where the seductive dance would lead. "But what if it's work?" She groaned, kicking herself away. "You and your bloody work!" I reached for the phone, answering with a hint of guilt. "Hey, Gwyn." "Sorry it's late, Sam." Gwyn's voice crackled through the speaker. "I didn't mean to disturb you, but I'm afraid I had no choice. My son's been in an accident and I need to get to Liverpool Medical Hospital ASAP. I need you to hold the fort tomorrow while I'm away." My heart sank, both for Gwyn and our ruined plans. "Jesus, I'm so sorry, Gwyn. Of course I'll cover. Is your son okay?" "I'm sure he will be, old boy. He's a tough nut to crack. I know you had the day off, and I'm sorry to ask, as I'm sure you both had plans." "Not at all. Anything I can do to help. Please let me know how he is when you see him." After hanging up, I turned to Ruby, deflated. She instantly recognized my expression and moved to comfort me. "What's happened?" "It's Gwyn. His son's been in an accident. I need to cover tomorrow. I'm sorry, babe, but our trip will have to wait." Ruby hugged me tightly. "Oh, honey, that's okay. I understand, as long as his son's all right." The next morning, I woke after a restless night, leaving Ruby sleeping peacefully. As I went through my morning routine, I caught sight of my unpacked suitcase in the corner. "Every cloud," I muttered with a wry smile, at least saved from the chore of packing. The day at the station started like any other, albeit with the added responsibilities of Gwyn's absence. I surprised myself with how easily I took to the senior role, handling phone calls and coordinating staff. If anything, it was good experience for when I eventually took over permanently. As the clock ticked towards the end of my grueling 12-hour shift, I sent Ruby a quick text, promising to make up for our cancelled plans with her favorite meal and a relaxing bath. The lack of response didn't worry me. She was probably busy with her own work. Just as I was about to leave, Kaylee, our young ticket booth collector, knocked on the office door. "Come in," I called. She entered looking a bit nervous. Boss." "It's Sam, Kaylee. We've worked together long enough now." She smiled sheepishly. "Right, sorry, Sam. I'm all cashed up for the night. Is it okay if I head out to catch the early bus?" "Of course. Have a safe trip home. See you tomorrow." No sooner had she left than the office phone rang. I recognized the central control number and, suppressing a sigh before answering, "Sam speaking. How can I help?" "Hi, Sam. It's Steve from Control. We've got an issue on your line. Seems to be an obstruction on the southbound track just past the station. Probably just a broken branch. Any chance you can take a look? We'll have to delay any trains until it's sorted." I glanced at the clock, my frustration mounting. "It's just me left at the station now, Steve. The nightmaster won't be in until 9 p.m. It'll be difficult to leave the station unattended." "Completely understand, Sam. Because of the obstruction, the last train has been delayed until 9:10 p.m. It should only take you a few minutes to check, as it looks like the error on the line is less than 10 meters from the station." Realizing I had no choice, I agreed. "All right, Steve, give me 20 minutes and I'll ring you back." "Thanks, Sam. It won't go unnoticed." I hung up, took a deep breath, and prepared for what I hoped would be my last task of the day. Donning my station jacket, I grabbed the heavy portable torch and my mobile phone. The station was eerily quiet as I left the office. With only one more train stopping tonight, I didn't expect many passengers this late on a Sunday evening. The emptiness felt oppressive as I walked along the platform and down the ramp towards the southbound tracks. Switching on the high beam of the torch, I watched as the darkness retreated before me, revealing the path of the train tracks ahead. I looked back one last time, half hoping to see someone enter the station, but was met with the same emptiness as before. "I guess it's just me, you, and this fucking branch then," I muttered to the tracks, trying to psych myself up for the task ahead. I'd walked only a few meters when my mobile rang. Not wanting to miss a call from Ruby, I fished it out of my pocket. The screen read Red, my nickname for my auburn-haired wife. I answered quickly. "There she is, the love of my life." "Have you heard of the trolley problem?" a distorted male voice replied. My blood ran cold. "What? Who is this? Where's Ruby?" I said, "Have you heard of the trolley problem?" "Who the fuck is this? Why do you have my wife's phone?" "Answer the question, Samuel. I don't like repeating myself, let alone thrice. And the last thing you want is for your wife to die because you couldn't listen." My heart pounded in my chest as realization dawned. Okay, wait a second. Trolley problem. Yes, I've heard of it. It's the question about ethics and making the right choice. Sacrifice one to save many. Correct. And you lucky son of a bitch, are about to solve it. Wait, why? What have I done to you? I've got money, not much, but it's yours. Just please, don't hurt my wife. The voice chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Sammy, I'm not going to hurt anyone. I'm going to leave that all down to you." "What do you mean? Where's my wife, you bastard?" "Someone's got a potty mouth, hasn't he? Keep walking and you'll find your answer." The call ended, leaving me frozen in place, mouth agape as the torchlight danced in front of me. Apprehensively, I moved forward, terrified of what I might find. After several meters, at the junction of the tracks, I caught movement in my peripheral vision to my left. I directed the torch beam towards the movement, and something glinted in the light. As I moved nearer, I realized it was coming from human eyes. I rushed forward to the body strapped across the train tracks, and instantly recognized the prone form of my beloved Ruby. She'd been tied to the tracks with chicken wire, blindfolded and gagged. I immediately set about trying to release her from her binds as she squirmed beneath me. I removed her blindfold and gag, revealing her terrified face. "Sam," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Get me free, please." "I'm trying," I said, struggling with the restraints. My fingers were already bleeding from the sharp wire, leaving crimson smears on Ruby's clothes and skin. The mobile rang again, but I ignored it, focusing on freeing my wife. It rang again and again, each time heightening my panic. Suddenly, a message flashed across the screen. "Answer the fucking phone or your wife will die in minutes." Shocked, I jumped when it rang once more. This time I answered. "Finally, you listen." "What do you—" "Shut it. You're done talking. You listen to me now and that's it. No more talking. I will explain the situation and then you will make a decision. It's as simple as that. You can choose between your wife... My wife, please, I choose my wife. You can take me. It's not that easy, Sammy. Interrupt me again and I'll end you both right now. There was a pause, and as I didn't answer, he continued. Good. Right then, the aforementioned trolley problem. A train is coming and will arrive here in 3 minutes. So here lies the problem. You can ring control and say there is no obstruction and it's an error, or you can say it's still there and to switch the tracks. Switch the tracks, I cried out. Whoa, 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 sweet child of mine, Sammy. Have you had a gander at the other tracks? My face went white. I drowned out Ruby's crying and screaming to pick up the torch and point it towards the same position on the other side of the tracks. In the torchlight, I saw 4, maybe 5 bodies all tied to the tracks. They were writhing in agony, trying to scream through their gags. The sight was horrifying. I could see exposed flesh where they'd struggled against their bindings, blood seeping from deep gashes. What is it? What's over there? Ruby cried as she saw me pointing my torch to the other track. I thought against telling her, but there was no point lying in our current predicament. I knelt beside her, frantically working at the wire while hurriedly explaining the situation. Save them, Sam, she pleaded. Save them. No, I love you. I don't know them. I love you too, baby. But it's the few for the many. You know it's the right choice. I'll always be with you. You've got 1 minute, Samuel, before I make the decision for you and contact control. The distorted voice sang from the mobile. I worked at the wire and finally got some traction. It was loosening. 30 seconds. Fine, I said as I grabbed the phone. Save the many. I sacrifice the few. Wow. I didn't think you'd make that decision, but okay. So let it be. Ring and let control know, and this whole thing can be over in a few minutes. I'm going to find you and fucking kill you. Temper. I cut him off and rang control. Hi, Steve. It's Sam. I'm afraid you'll have to switch to the other track. There's one hell of a branch on the main track that's going to need a forklift. Took your time, Steve laughed. Okay, no problem. I looked at my wife's pleading eyes as she mouthed the words, don't. I shone my light over to the several people tied to the other line, wriggling around like bait worms on hooks. I looked at my feet before I spoke again. Scratch that, Steve. It's not as big as I thought. I'll lever it off now. Keep the original course. You sure, Sam? Yeah, no worries. Okay, train inbound in 4 minutes. I hung up and immediately it rang back. Congratulations, Samuel. You've made the selfless choice. Your wife will be proud. I threw the phone away as I went back to freeing her. Leave me or you'll get hit, Ruby cried. I'm going nowhere without you. I cut my fingers up badly but managed to free her arms, and we both worked on her legs. But the clock was ticking. In the distance we heard the familiar toot-toot of the approaching train. Our speed increased as we helplessly worked at her feet bindings. In the distance I heard the train arrive and stop at the station. Knowing that we weren't going to make it, Ruby grabbed me and looked me straight in the eyes. I love you, but you've got to go. Not yet, there's still time. Damn it, go now! We heard the train's engine start up again, and it was now or never to pull off a miracle. The next minute seemed to slow down to an eternity. I managed to get one of Ruby's legs free and tried to hoist her back with my weight, hoping she'd break free even if it took the skin from her leg. But the wire held and the train passed in front of us, severing both her legs at the kneecaps as I pulled her away from the tracks. The sound was sickening, a wet crunch followed by Ruby's agonized screams. Arterial blood sprayed wildly, soaking us both as I desperately tried to stem the bleeding. The stench of iron filled the air, mixing with the acrid smell of the train's exhaust. Ruby immediately went into shock as I worked on tourniquets for both legs. My hands shook uncontrollably, slick with her blood. At that point the phone rang. It was him. I answered and heard a taunting reminiscent of the Jurassic Park screensaver scene. I said you choose one, Samuel, not have your cake and eat it, so now this is happening. I heard the clunk of the track change and watched in horror as the main track diverted to the sub-track. No! I screamed before realizing that was the last passenger train. You fucked up, I shouted into the phone. There are no more trains till 6 a.m. and I'll have the track closed by then. I started laughing hysterically. True, but it seems you've forgotten about the coal train that doesn't stop. My eyes went wide as I heard the steam pipe of the approaching coal train, knowing it was less than a minute away. There was nothing I could do. I focused on securing my wife's leg ties as the nightly coal train barreled through, ending several lives I could have saved, people I'd never met, a mistake I'd never forget. The sounds were horrific. Screams quickly turned to wet gurgles, bones crunched, flesh tore. When it passed, the tracks were littered with mangled flesh and pulverized bones, two of which had been children that had been decapitated due to the small stature. The stench of blood and viscera was overwhelming. I vomited violently, unable to process the carnage before me. In the days that followed, I was questioned relentlessly by the police. The media dubbed it the trolley tragedy, and my name was dragged through the mud. How could I have let this happen? Why didn't I alert authorities sooner? Ruby survived initially but got sepsis, then gangrene, which finally took her life 3 months later. Her last words to me were, "It's not your fault," but how could I believe that? I quit my job shortly after, and am currently drinking myself to death, trying to work out what I could have done differently. The nightmares are relentless. I see the victims as vengeful spirits, accusing me of their deaths. I can't scrub the feeling of sticky warmth from under my fingernails, no matter how hard I try. The caller was never caught, but sometimes I receive unmarked packages on the anniversary on the incident. The worst one was a severed foot from one of the victims that he must have bagged before the bodies were taken away, a demented trophy of that horrific night. Why must the killer still torment me with my decision? Clearly my psychological torture has only just begun, and I'm left questioning if I made the right choice, knowing that either way, I'll never escape the guilt of the lives lost that night. Did I do the right thing? What would you have done? These are just 3 stories, but there are countless others waiting to be told. Whether you believe in ghosts, curses, or things that go bump in the night, remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that make you question what's real. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.